I'm going to have each person individually come and sit up here with me for a couple of minutes. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. But I'm going to start with you, Bonnie. Since co-founding Actual Films in 1998, Bonnie Cohen has produced and directed an array of award-winning films, including The Island President, which is actually one of my favorite films. I love that film so much. It crushed me.
Good news for him, though, this past month.
We can talk about that. Inside Guantanamo, The Rape of Europa, and Wonders Are Many, among many others. She recently executive produced 3.5 Minutes, a film in which I did some early strategy work on, which had its premiere at the 2015 Sundance Film Festival and aired on HBO. She also executive produced Art and Craft, which premiered at the 2014 Tribeca Film Festival. And she's the co-founder of the Catapult Film Fund. And you have a film here, right?
Yeah.
You want to just...
Yeah, we have Audrey and Daisy, which is, we premiered at Sundance in January, and we're picked up by Netflix out of the festival. And we've been doing some limited screenings, but we were not going to miss AFI if asked to be here, which we were happy to have been offered the invitation. It's a film about two teenage girls who were sexually assaulted in high school and the kind of subsequent social media bullying that goes on with pictures and videos that were taken after the assaults, and the kind of conversations that are going on in communities, how communities and families and teachers are reacting to these events.
Mm-hmm. And what's your role on this project? Are you the director, you're the producer?
I'm the co-director with my husband, John Schenk, and I'm one of the 3 producers.
Okay, fantastic. And I wanted to ask that because I think it's important. This is what we've been teasing out here, which is the creative voice of the director versus the workhorsey support that of the producer, and that so often it's women who are the latter and not the former.
Well, yeah, I mean, I also we try and as often as possible, or I try when I'm producing, to play a creative role, and have helped sort of term the creative producer role for documentary, because often the producers have some of the more interesting things to say about the film and how it goes, and the collaboration can really be pretty, I hate to say satisfying, because I think a lot of the producer's work is workhorsey and still very difficult, and some of the more difficult things to do on the film. But I think it's coming. I think we're moving forward.
I feel that too, as a producer on a film project I'm working on right now.
Oh, good.
So I'm going to ask you. I kind of want to pivot from you as filmmaker and to you as funder and the Catapult Film Fund, and why I really wanted to invite you to this conversation is because I feel like the important role that Catapult plays in funding at the early stage, and why. And so I want to tease it out a little bit with you, and why you decided as a funder to be at that stage of film funding, and how you think and how you think that has an impact on women or filmmakers of color. What might be different for them than your average John Doe.
So I started Catapult with
Love to the John Does.
my incredible partner, Lisa Chanoff, who is someone who had been involved in documentary prior to us starting Catapult as a funder, but we got together about we're coming up on our 5-year anniversary, which is very exciting. We got together 5 years ago, and she was just very curious about these funding gaps, these holes in the funding landscape for documentary, and where a new fund could be most effective. And that's where, as a filmmaker, it was great to be able to say, there are so few funds that fund development, that really kickstart, jumpstart projects, and allow voices to be heard that otherwise would just die on the vine without that initial seed funding. And she comes from a background, her family was involved in Silicon Valley. She comes from kind of a background in entrepreneurship, and really took to the idea of that risk, which was very unusual to hear. She loved the idea of being able to jumpstart something that might otherwise die, rather than just thinking about whether it was viable or sustainable or a good idea from a funding perspective. So that is the first thing to say, that she just bit off this idea fully enthusiastically, and I really felt as a filmmaker, I know so many projects, not only of our own, but of my colleagues who, had they just had that $15,000 or $20,000 to go to wherever the location was and actually speak to the characters or shoot that first scene and be able to edit it for a production funder who now insists that you have, if not just a few scenes, an entire rough cut in order to get money, the film would actually take off, and it's proven to be true. So I would say that we now have 17 films that have gone off into the world, and some, that are longitudinal studies and longer-term projects that are still gestating. There is also a percentage that never are going to go anywhere. Either access has fallen through, or they couldn't unlock production funding. I mean, so there is a risk card still involved with what Catapult does. But we have sort of proven time and again that this early money is incredibly valuable. So it's been very gratifying.
So, I mean, I want to get to the point, that's great.
Oh, I want to say one more thing. So we also offer, we have just in the last year and a half started what are called momentum grants. So all of the Catapult grantees that have come in early, the idea is we are looking at the sustainable model, and we talk to a lot of funders about it. And we're now starting to offer these momentum grants that at another critical moment in the production or post-production, the grantees can come back and make a case for why they need another infusion, either of cash or mentorship or something. So we're starting to do that next piece.
That's fantastic. How do you think, do you feel like this is more or less important for women filmmakers or filmmakers of color having this kind of access to this early development funding? I mean, I think,
Yes.
I heard what you had to say about your partner, about Lisa, and sort of, investing in somebody's vision. And I just wonder if you think that there's a difference for women and filmmakers of color when it comes to people investing in their vision and feeling like I know what this could be, I understand, or I see what potential this is here, to program this film, that there's going to be an audience for it. Do you think these other kinds of filmmakers have more of an uphill battle with making that case?
I feel like with Catapult, because we don't really have an agenda, we don't have a social issue agenda. You apply to us if you have a great story to tell. And so there are no preconceptions about what the application needs to be other than being able to prove that you have a good story and you're the person to tell it. So often that is a leg up for women and people of color because they are the right people to be telling the story. And we dive pretty deep into that piece. Because there's a lack of agenda, I think the landscape is pretty level. The playing field is pretty level.
How many other funders do you know of in the space that come in at this early stage? Are there other ones that you?
Yeah, I mean, Ken can correct me. I don't know if I have them all, but so Sundance comes in early, or they can come in early. But although they require, even at the early stage, for you to have something to show, we don't require that. ITVS can give development money fairly early. Tribeca, HBO has often given development money that generally to filmmakers that they know and have worked with before. It wouldn't be a first time.
You have to be part of the family.
Filmmaker, right. Anybody else that comes in early? Flood. Any of the state funders can come in early. Humanities councils. Yeah,
Right.
but it's limited.
But those are all limited, and those are all structured around very particular things.
The NEH.
Right. It feels like you're the one of the few funders that leave it open.
We also just went to a rolling application. We had been taking 2 submissions a year and had a lot of discussions with Sundance and IDA and Tribeca, and a lot of the funders have been getting together to think about whether, and these guys did a ton of work on just what the priorities should be for filmmakers and the advantages of going to rolling. And we're having some growing pains, but yeah, it's actually, we thought it was going to make it easier for us. It's actually harder for us, but I think that our reaction time in some cases can be quicker, but actually in some cases can be longer. So we're working that out.
Do folks have, I want to turn it over, I just wanted to give people a sense of Catapult and what there's, how they occupy the space and why they're distinctive and maybe different from other funders. Do people have questions?
While you were speaking, I was looking at your application, and you require a fiscal sponsorship. And most of the organizations that give you fiscal sponsorship, they want to see also a rough cut or some kind of video.
No, not always.
Not always.
I mean, we have had many cases of funders, international funders, mostly because they don't have a relationship necessarily, obviously, with a fiscal sponsor in the U.S., and we send them to our friends at IDA, who have been incredibly accommodating and helpful to a number of our grantees who had no other means of getting a fiscal sponsorship.
So it's possible to get it before you actually
Yes,
have it.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we need a way to process the grant, and
Yes.
And we now have, I think about 30% of our grantees are from other countries.
Okay. Thank you.
Is
So-
that fair to say? Yeah. Okay.
So speaking of other countries, and this may be since this just happened this morning, and I've been reading about, yes, as a filmmaker and as a funder of folks who come from, other places, how do you think, can you talk a little bit about how the vote for the UK leaving the European Union may have an impact on a filmmaker and in terms of co-production funding and just that kind of stuff, what your sense is? And you may not have
We're just getting our heads around at Catapult. We're starting to understand more what the co-production deals look like for Europe and how the national funding works, which is such an incredible boon for most European filmmakers. So it's going to have tremendous impact on English filmmakers who used to have access to that money. I mean, this is going to impact them unless they bring on a French, German, Danish, whatever co-producer, they will no longer have access to those funds. So, I'm just thinking about, often what we do is, filmmakers, I'm just thinking about, we're working with the German filmmaker Till Schauder, who's making this film, When God Sleeps, right now, about an Iranian musician, and while he lives in Brooklyn, he has a lot of access to German state funding, and he can use grants from Catapult to leverage and help him get money in Germany and other EU countries, and it's actually worked very well for him. And I'm not sure what the impact will be now. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a downturn, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Bonnie? Move to the next funder on the hot seats. Amy Halpin here with me is the Director of Filmmaker Services at IDA. She worked closely with hundreds of independent documentary artists each year, God bless her, consulting and advising on all aspects of documentary funding. She's been with IDA since 2006, and she oversees the organization's fiscal sponsorship program, which administers over $8 million each year to independent documentary projects in the U.S. and abroad. And you can read more. Let me just say this. Amy manages and was the key architect of the Père Lorenz Documentary Fund, an annual competitive grant program supporting documentaries that address pressing U.S. issues. And she also was part of the programming team at Getting Real for 2014, which I participated in, was lots of fun. And I'm assuming you'll be doing again this year, shortly.
I'm doing, yes, we're,
Speaking.
I have noted, there we go. 2016, we actually just launched registration for the next Getting Real conference, 2016. So we're excited about that.
So talk a little bit about, and it's interesting this came up, so talk a little bit about IDA and your relationship and with filmmakers and your funding, sort of the framework for how things work. And then I want to ask you a couple of questions.
So we're a support organization for documentary filmmakers. We've been around for about 30 years in the field, and our fiscal sponsorship program has been around for 25 of those years. So we've been doing it for a long time, and we recently, about 5 years ago, got into funding documentaries as well through the Père Lorenz Documentary Fund. In addition to that, we have lots of educational programs and other types of support services for filmmakers. But those are the funding and fiscal sponsorship piece are primarily what I work on, direct services for filmmakers.
And so do you have is there Is it a part of IDA and your strategic, funding and how you think about things to focus in on women and filmmakers of color? Do you have anything particular for them, or does that part of your thinking when you're making decisions about?
That's a good question. It's not a specific mandate of the Parallel Lens Documentary Fund grant, which is the grant that we administer. We're a 501c3 organization, so we re-grant funds. We have a funder who has a mandate, and they give us money to give out to the field. So our primary consideration has to be that mandate and what they're tasking us with. With that said, we have an organizational mandate to support underrepresented groups within the field. So we take that into consideration in all of our funding. So it might not be sort of the deciding factor in how we fund, but it's certainly something that we're considering along the way. For example, like this previous year with our fund was the first time we really closely tracked demographic information and pretty quickly realized as we got close to the deadline that we had not enough applicants who were people of color. Like that was just really clear looking at the numbers. It was like, wow, we just didn't get enough people applying. And it was surprising how relatively easy it was to increase those numbers with just a couple of strategic outreach, like 3 phone calls. And I think we tripled the number. So it's one of those things that if you care to do it and you make the effort to do it, I think we realized this year it's actually a lot easier to find those projects. There are a lot of them out there, and a lot of them are really, really good. So that's something I, will certainly do earlier in the process from here on out, because it was a little bit surprising. It was like, oh, look at all these projects we had no idea about. And we ended up funding, I think, we have a relatively small fund. I mean, it's, $200,000 to give out. So we gave out 10 grants, and I think 2 of those grants came from that outreach push.
So, I mean, given that you see how easy it is.
Yeah.
I want to urge accountability moments, I guess, while I'm having people here with me. What will it take to ensure that happens every time? What can the field or the field help you do to be able to ensure that is a part of the way that you operate?
I think we have to keep tracking the information. I mean, we need to look at the trends over time. We need to make sure we're pulling out that information. And I think we need to be really transparent about it. So, releasing your numbers publicly and encouraging other funders and other people in the field to do the same. There's something to just being willing to stand up and stand behind the projects you fund. And we've seen as organizations, sometimes you do that and you're like really embarrassed by what comes out. I mean, that's happened to us where we've been like, wow, I can't believe this is what our numbers look like. But you still have to be willing to say, we see that there's room for improvement and we care enough to keep working on it. So I don't know what else there is to do except for that. And to encourage people to nurture that talent kind of all along the pathway. It's like funding is a big piece of it. And obviously it's a really, really key piece for the field to get behind, because if the projects aren't funded, they're never going to get to the stage where they're at. Festivals can either accept or not accept them, and awards can honor them. So we really are the first, piece of that chain, and so it's really crucial that we kind of take are accountable for that.
So I'm wondering, just to push on you a little bit more.
Sure.
I'm wondering if something like, if you annually had a group of, women and filmmakers of color that were collaborating with you. I know that I've actually been on review panels a million times, but not even necessarily a review panel, but just a group of people that would work with you and agree to work with you on outreach to the community's filmmakers of color. And when you hit that moment in time, if that was something that actually was operationalized. I know we just a moment ago heard Katie say Cinema Eye has some work to do, but IDA Award was another close moment that tracked with that. So I'm wondering if there are just ways that we could actually agree to move forward? Like at Getting Real, do we talk about what that would look like to operationalize something strategically for the organization?
I think we'd love to talk about that at Getting Real, and Ken's definitely the better suited person to speak about that, and how that's going to be tackled. But I think there's the awards piece of it is. I'm not even going to speak to it because it's not my area of expertise, but it's an area that I think we recognize, especially after this past year, that needs a lot of work. And for the funding piece, I think you brought up something important, which is who's making the decisions, and that's really, really key to consider in all of this stuff is who's deciding. And there are a set number of, I hate the word, but gatekeepers, everybody uses it. But it is, it's something we have to think about is who are the people who are in the room picking the films, because it's not just a taste issue. Taste is culturally determined a lot of the time, and we need to make sure that there are enough people of color on those panels and in the room, and that it's not all the same people. I think that's the other, thing that can easily happen is you sort of are always picking from the same pool, and you have to expand the pool, give more people opportunities to be in the room. So we switched a couple of years ago from a process where, I think like a lot of funders, we would ask other sort of industry people to be in the room to make those decisions, and we decided not to do that anymore and to move to an entirely filmmaker. Our whole committee is made up of filmmakers. So that represents kind of who we are as an organization. That was why we decided to go that way. I think you can also diversify by pulling people in from kind of other issue areas, which I know is something that some funders do. So to bring people in from kind of activists and other circles, we chose to work just with filmmakers, and to not always invite the same person. So last year we invited a cinematographer who'd never sat on a panel before. So he's got a different perspective. We invite, composers, they all have to be kind of makers in the field, creative types and editors and people who aren't the usual suspects The thing that surprised me the first time I ever did one of these panels a couple years ago was we went around the room and talked about the 20 films that we had narrowed down to finalist group, and everybody knew everybody. It was, they all knew all the filmmakers. They were all familiar with the projects. They had history with it. And that really changed the conversation. And I think, a couple people might have gotten opportunities to get funded that year if there hadn't been that history with people, or they were funded because of their history and not because of what they were actually presenting. Right. So we're trying to diversify that so that the people in the room are not people who are going to know every project and necessarily know all the people involved. So some fresh eyes. I don't know that that's better, but it's different. Yeah. So we'll try something different. Yeah.
I want to ask a quick question that's sort of outside of this altogether, which is, and we talked a little bit about this the other day, about small-scale funders and distribution rights. And essentially, yeah, exactly. So, we've got kind of a situation where I think, particularly for a lot of women and filmmakers of color who have gotten money from smaller scale funders to start them off, which has sort of been in a way, development for them, development funding in some ways, but who, want a lot of, want distribution rights when they can go right to Kickstarter or Seed and Spark or something like that and, raise 25, 50,000, sometimes, I know in here, when I worked with Marty and Michael in the early stages of Almost Sunrise, they were able to raise $100,000 off of Kickstarter in the beginning of their project.
They're one of our grantees, too.
Yes, and one of the grantees, and a great, wonderful filmmaking team. So can you talk a little bit about where you see that collision course? I mean, that's been playing out for a while.
It's a good question. I mean, I think my personal perspective on it, I have a longer history in fiscal sponsorship than I do as a funder, and in that role, you're often an intermediary. You're listening to the filmmakers' concerns about the funding environment, and you're listening to the funders' concerns about working with filmmakers. So you really do have you hear it all. And what I was hearing from filmmakers over and over is that they felt like people were demanding a lot for very little. So funders were coming in with. They were not necessarily in the riskiest position. They weren't like Catapult coming in at the beginning. They were sometimes coming in later, and then kind of with relatively small grants, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, and demanding stuff like presented by upfront credit and executive producer credit for $5,000, and people just wanted they want some crazy stuff. So part of I would often just say, well, we need to push back, but that's hard to do when you need money. You're not in a position to negotiate when you can't pay your editor next week. And so I think just pushing back with the funders and saying, you are not negotiating. They sort of, I would talk to the funder and they'd say, well, they didn't ask me, they didn't object to it. And you'd say, well, you're not, when only one of you is in that position of power, it's not really a negotiation. So that's something I think as a field we need to talk about. And I think a lot of funders are very aware of it and are coming around and really thinking about it. And they just sort of didn't know that it was a problem for people. And overall, when you talk to people, I think most people are really willing to look at it as an issue, because it's a sustainability question. You need to be able to reserve those rights for more money. Otherwise, you can't make a living doing this. So, yeah.
Jeff Hardwick is the Assistant Director in NEH's Division of Public Programs, which supports television and radio programming, museum exhibitions, historic site interpretations, library programs, and digital projects. They are in the mix. He comes from an academic background in American Studies. He's very smart, with a doctorate in Yale University and an MA from the I'm totally,
That's okay.
yeah.
Keep going.
He's,
keep going.
yeah, just keep going. I'm let him know. Let me get to this. He oversees a number of NEH-funded film projects, including American Experience, Walt Disney, by Sarah Colt, the American Masters Special, Ames, the Architect and the Painter, by Jason Cohn, and Ben Loderman's film, 1913 Seeds of Conflict. He published a widely reviewed biography of the architect and father of the shopping mall, Victor Gruen. Am I saying that right? Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, he's very smart and literary and a funder. So let's get into it.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Let's talk a little bit about, first of all, I'm just going to say, and I appreciate it, but God, applying for an NEH grant. Whew.
It is.
That is ugh.
Yes, it is.
Roll it up that hill.
You can talk to Amy about it as well. It's.
Talk to us about the process.
It's a difficult process, I will admit that. We have 2 levels of funding, so development and production. We don't have a rolling deadline. I can't imagine us ever going to a rolling deadline, so we have 2 deadlines a year, January and August. It is a difficult process, and that's largely because it's taxpayer funds, right? And so it has to be very conscientious, very vetted, lengthy. I will admit, usually 5 to 6 months process before we come to a final decision. We're trying to streamline it a little bit, just in terms of what we request from people. So, say at the development stage, it's essentially just a narrative. We don't ask for any rough cuts, any trailers. You don't have to have anything in the can about the film you're working on. You do have to have some sort of previous work. And so for first-time filmmakers, what that usually means is teaming up with a more experienced executive producer. So I can think of a number of projects. Jason Cohn's actually Eames. He teamed up with someone who had work samples, essentially, and it was Jason's first feature documentary. And so in some ways, that's not that horrible a process. The development, production is a completely different story. Production funds are much more. They can go up to $650,000. And you have to have a script. Everybody balks at that, especially people doing more contemporary films. We hear endless questions. I'm doing a cinema verite. I don't exactly know what the script's going to be. How am I going to know what the script is? And since we are a federal funder, we have to know what's going to appear on the screen before we fund it.
So basically, it's not for you. Let's get real. Like if you're
It's
doing
not
a
for
cinema,
you.
yeah,
No,
if you're doing
no,
a cinema verite,
no.
it's probably not for
It's
you.
probably
Probably
not. For you. No.
Yeah, okay.
Although in the past, we're, in case you care, NEH is celebrating its 50th anniversary. So we've been funding films since 1967 was our first film that we funded.
What was that
And it was a sort of strange film. We funded a Jesuit priest in Mobile, Alabama, who was documenting desegregation of schools in Mobile. I have no idea whatever happened to the film, if it ever got finished. It was a grant for $10,000, and that's all I know about it. But so, in the 70s, we funded a Frederick Weissman film. We funded a number of different sorts of films in the past. We have become a little more cautious since the mid-90s, I'd say, in terms of what sorts of films we fund. Our budget has decreased substantially, and so taking risks is a little more difficult for us. That said, we're talking, we've been talking to some filmmakers as well and some distribution places. We'd like to start funding shorts. We'd like to fund more stuff that goes straight to web. We haven't completely figured that out. We do have a new grant called Digital Grants, which does fund stuff straight to web. But it's like turning a giant boat. It's a slow process.
So let me ask you this. You just said, and understandably, those of us paying attention in the 90s remember what that time was like. And so, yes, I can understand that some organizations have become a little bit more risk averse. What does that mean, do you think? And I don't know if these are things that you've actually looked at or not, but what does that mean for women and filmmakers of color?
Yeah.
I mean, I often find that we're considered, I often find that our points of view can be considered, advocacy points of view or challenging points of view because they're challenging the dominant paradigm, right? But it is our point of view. So, do we, by definition, just become something that is a risk?
No, not by definition.
Okay.
Of course not. It is interesting. I was listening to Katie's talk and thinking, all of our statistics are up online and available to the public in terms of what we fund, not in terms of applications. So in terms of numbers, we'd have to do that, crunch those numbers internally. But someone should do it because they are up there, and you can easily look at which films we funded at development and production. Executive producers, directors are all listed there, and it would be. I don't know offhand, to be honest. I was running through my mind. I can think of a number of female filmmakers like Sarah Colt, but others as well.
So you're government funded.
Yes, it's a good.
But you don't
yes.
have the numbers on
No,
the gender or
no.
diversity breakdown of what you fund?
No, we could. They're available, but we do not have them. We used to have an evaluation department, and it was administratively cut at some point, and so there is very little evaluation.
Oh, honey.
It's true.
Oh, honey.
Yeah. They are. The producer level would be more interesting also, because the producer level, I think you would see some of the bias that Katie talked about there.
So let me ask you this question, and I'm wondering, I think our government is in a challenging place at the moment. I think we could all say that. Governments around the world, in the West particularly. But more than the political partisanship and all that, which I don't think is a useful conversation to get into, I'm actually really more interested in the distinction between how services are administered and managed versus an analog versus a digital space. Meaning you could see that the digital revolution has become a part of the corporate sector, the private sector, and processes and things have become easier for us. I can pick up my phone and I can get an app and I can do a million different things. I can find on Yelp where I want to eat. I can do blah, 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 blah. But it's very difficult when it comes to, government services oftentimes to access them, to work with them, to do the laborious application for the NEH fund. Do you see any opportunity for there to be? I mean, I know in at least in New York City, for example, in the city level, I find a lot of city agencies are beginning to try to incorporate digital and app-based solutions for people to access data or to access their government services. And I'm wondering if filmmakers or people came to apply friendly pressure, not advocacy, evil, mean pressure, and mad pressure, but gentle. How can we collaborate on a way to think about making this process easier? Is that something
such
that's
a big
even?
question, so beyond my pay grade.
Yeah.
So, that gets
I'm sorry.
into. I mean, I don't want to get too technical, but that gets into like if you're awarded a government contract of any sort, whether it's from the Defense Department or National Science Foundation or us, you have to go through this thing called grants.gov, which was supposedly, at the time, the friendly technology, that interface. How friendly it is, you could ask Amy that question. She would be able to speak more frankly to that. People have problems with it. It used to fail a lot. It is much, much smoother. It is not an app that you can upload stuff to easily. Part of that is also just the basic issues of who can apply, right? So you have to register with the federal government before you apply. You have to have a fiscal sponsor before you come in, so you usually come in through your fiscal sponsor. If you come in through someone like IDA or a university as a fiscal sponsor, whoever you come in through, and it just has to be any 501c3, if they've worked with that system, then ideally it's not going to be horrible. It's just loading PDFs up. It is not the easiest, though. I will make a plug. Public programs, we're a small group. We're 8 people. We all sit in our cubicles. We're friendly. We like to answer the phone. We pick up emails. People don't. I especially will say first-time filmmakers don't reach out enough to us.
Did you hear that? Webcast?
They really don't.
He wants you to reach out.
People who we know, I'll be honest, like people we know pretty well will sometimes after the fact, after they applied, said, oh, I didn't know if I could actually call you guys and ask, but you definitely should reach out. We will give you a really frank assessment on the front end, whether the film is sort of a good fit for us from a humanities perspective, and then, all the dot your I and cross your T things that you need to put in place before going to the hassle of applying. You don't want to go to the hassle of applying because it is a laborious process, and you don't want to go through that process putting in an application that has forgotten to put together a team of humanities advisors or has no clue of what sort of, what bigger story it's telling. Or I can think of a number of ways people make first-time mistakes. And so really giving us a ring, sending us an email, all of our contact info is up on our NEH Public Programs website. And we do some workshops. We do a couple with IDA. We would like to do more, to be honest. It's great to have this here. A lot of film festivals have cut the industry side, which I find difficult. It's nice to actually reach out to people and tell them that you're available. I would say, in terms of percentages, so on the development side, our percentages are much higher because there's less at risk for us. So, the funds can go up to $75,000. I think our percentages are about 25% of all applications get funded at the development stage, which is pretty good. Production, it's a little less percentage-wise, but the money is much better. But, development, we're willing to take risks, whether that is however you perceive that risk. Let me go back to the question, though, you ask of, because I think it is a good one. The women or filmmakers of color, if they're inherently topics that they're interested in doing, if those become sort of risky in some way, given the point of view or something. And from our perspective, they don't have to be. They can be, of course, from our perspective, but they don't have to be in the sense of we fund first and foremost humanities content, which often translates to history films, but as long as a filmmaker can, tell a really compelling story that is going to hold an audience's attention, teach an audience something new that they don't know, is deeply grounded in humanities, have talked to humanities scholars, what point of view that is or who the filmmaker is, in some ways, it's important to us, and we talk a lot about how to nurture the field, especially in terms of first-time filmmakers, because we traditionally have not been very good at that, and so we're trying to figure out ways to do that. The state councils, I'll be honest, are much better at that. California Humanities, Cal Humanities, John
Great
Lightfoot
over there. Yeah, I love John.
and New York Humanities, Massachusetts Humanities, they are much better at funding first-time filmmakers.
So Eliza Licht, I think she doesn't really need to be introduced, but I'm going to introduce her anyway, as a longtime member of POV's senior management team. She works closely with the POV's executive producer, now Justine Megan. And Chris White. And other senior staff to set priorities and direction for the series, and with POV's programming team on series selection. Licht is an industry leader in developing and implementing community engagement strategies to maximize the impact and visibility of documentary films. She builds and oversees broad program strategies through engagement, communications, digital, station relations, and fundraising. She spearheaded engagement campaigns for over 200 films. So I am just a little speck. 200 films, okay? I think if you look at my bio, I think there are maybe 7 in there. Including American Promise, Food Inc., and Last Train Home. She works with public television stations, educators, and community organizations to present screenings of POV films and develop and distribute accompanying educational resource materials to audiences nationwide. She has built a network of over 8,000 organizations committed to leveraging the power of documentary film as a tool for dialogue and engagement. Pretty amazing stuff. So, Eliza, I want to ask, I just want to sort of tee up so you can share with people, what are the opportunities for funding through POV? Just to put that out there. So how do filmmakers come to POV? And I think...
Sure. And actually, let me take a step back and say American Documentary is the organization for which I work. It's a nonprofit. POV is by far our oldest, and it's our most well-known project, but we also have America Reframed, which is in season 4 right now on the World Channel, and POV Digital also has production. So it's AMDOC in general, though I think we're talking specifically
there's
about
more.
POV.
Well, we could talk about those
can
as
talk
well.
about it
That'd be
all.
great. In fact, and I
Absolutely.
think America Reframed would actually be important for the context of this conversation, given that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
But for POV, we have a call for entries, and we're predominantly an acquisition series, so we will pay a licensing fee. So in that way, we're funding. We also have some co-production funds where we'll come in early. And again, a lot of those are come through open call, or we're out at festivals and we're meeting with filmmakers. We're working with our partners in the field. But everyone can apply. It's free. That's the number one way. And then again, we're going out, we're meeting with people as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So you've just had, not just, but relative, POV, American Documentary, is in transition.
We
You've
are.
had new leadership.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about, if you can share, where you see the direction POV is taking it, if how different or how broad or sort of where you're going now, and in terms of what that might mean for women and filmmakers of color? Like, I think POV has a wonderful profile. People love the series. Filmmakers really want to collaborate and work with POV and want their films broadcast on POV. I mean, just my experience of the years I've been working directly as a consultant to filmmakers, they want to get on POV. And I think it's a space where as we've seen, you do a lot better than the rest of the field in a lot of ways. Can you talk a little bit about what a strategy might be, or how POV is thinking about strengthening that, or is it a priority? How are you thinking about moving forward for women and filmmakers of color.
Absolutely, but I should say that from our inception,
Yeah.
that has been one of our key missions, is to have underrepresented communities on public television, in communities for the American public. I think I'm very proud, I'm excited about the stats and that IL and POV are doing better, but we should be doing even better, I would say. And in our ideal world, right, all things being equal, those stats would equal the stats of the American populace. So that's sort of, I think, what we're all hoping for and aiming for, and definitely something that we're thinking about at POV American Documentary. And so with the transition, with new leadership, with new ideas, kind of we're reinvigorated. We've always been thinking this way, but kind of like, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? There's a lot of things in the mix. We're figuring it out, and we're actually planning on having going around the country and meeting and talking with filmmakers and kind of finding out what is needed in the field, and meeting with our partners and finding out
like a listening tour.
Exactly. Kind
fantastic.
of like what we could do and how we can help.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about Netflix last night.
Yes.
And I didn't ask other people this question, and maybe I should have, so I apologize. But
Bonnie's
you are
gone, I think.
you are the other kind of distributor or broadcaster more directly. How do you see, or do you see Netflix having an impact on what's the kind of content that you're able to fund and have broadcast on POV? Do you see there being a challenge to public television, or to your position as a broadcaster, and what you can offer against Netflix coming in and saying we have $6 billion in funding?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be. The thing is, we don't know, right? And we know kind of what's happening right now. We don't know what's going to be happening in 3 years. So I think we're all very interested. We're not sleeping on it. It's something that we're definitely talking about and thinking about and trying to strategize. That said, I mean, I think, and I will kind of paraphrase Justine Nagan, my new boss, but she said, it's all kind of good for this ecosystem of independent films. So how does that feed into us specifically, though? I don't know. That's a question. It's something, I'm hoping that we will get more information about it, because Netflix, I think, has not been very open.
They're not very forthcoming.
Exactly.
With their numbers.
So, I think we're all really interested to see where it goes. I'm not allowed to ask you, but I mean, do you have anything you want to share? Or any thoughts on this?
You can ask me.
Okay.
I'm not a funder, though. See, Eliza's like, the hot seat on you. I mean, I think from the perspective of the filmmakers I've been talking to and I've been advising, I think, filmmakers need money. Like they need to be sustainable. They need to get paid. I think also filmmakers believe in mission, and a lot of documentary filmmakers care very deeply about public television and public media and feel that their content should be on public media. And I think that there's a tension for a lot of people between having a sustainable career, what looks like could be a sustainable career, potentially, by taking certain kinds of dollars from the commercial sector, versus making content that is really in their vision and feels right, and is part of a dialogue and a conversation.
And not behind a paywall.
And not behind a paywall, So I think that's something that you offer. That's a strength, and that's really powerful, particularly for people who care about, cheesy as it is, democracy and all these other things, particularly in this moment in time. But I won't go that far. I want to ask one other question about MacArthur.
Okay.
And I know there's only, again, I'm sure you're in the process of working through this, but, the MacArthur Foundation has decided to stop funding. They've changed their funding strategy and decided to stop giving funds directly to filmmakers, and are going to be working with a group of organizational partners to help support filmmakers. And they're not here, and I can't speak for them. I can see making that choice and why one would make that choice. I think it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. I've watched filmmakers really struggle with, being sustainable and art in the creative needs that they have as makers, and there are a lot of great organizations that have been stepping in to sort of like Firelight Media Producers Lab to work with filmmakers to help them develop their films. And maybe hold them accountable to the funding and all those kinds of things. So I think that that's huge. Some filmmakers have also said to me, and these tend to be the more established ones who know how to make films, actually know how the process, that they feel like, it's an opportunity that, that money is going to these institutions and not to the filmmakers, and they're salty about it. So, there's been an illusion that POV or AMDOC would be one of these organizations that would be a partner in this process. Have you thought at all about, I'm assuming you're thinking about what does that look like? What kinds of things would you do to support, to ensure that women and filmmakers of color were a part of that, or a center piece of that support that you would provide via additional MacArthur funding if it's even happening? I'm curious, what's that process for POV? How are you negotiating that?
Yeah, I will say, I also cannot speak for MacArthur, but I will say that while they are changing their strategy, they have been very clear that they are still very committed to the field, and so in many ways it's good news. And they've talked about sort of maybe upping their grants to organizations that they already work with in one bucket, and that would be POV, American Documentary, which, since our inception, we wouldn't be around without MacArthur. They've been sort of our biggest supporter.
Yeah. They're great.
No. So what that, so we don't know exactly what that would look like, but definitely additional funding would go towards productions, so co-producing, and both, for broadcast online and also, shorter digital projects, I think, as well. And as part of that, but as part of all of our mission, includes in a big way, as I was talking about before, women and people of color.
So would you make your listening tour, would you make sort of this question?
You're dubbing it a listening tour. I'm like, meetings.
Meetings, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Your meetings. I'm sorry. I just blew it. I just
Listening
made
tour
more
just
work.
makes it kind of,
I just elevated it for POV and put much more work on their plate. Would your meetings with the film community and conversation with the filmmaker community include perhaps sort of some of this stuff? That if you, would you?
Of course. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It's part of our core mission. It's always part of our conversations, but I think we can make it,
Yeah, okay.
I should say, sorry, I don't think I said this. Wincoat gave us recently a fund, and it's for emerging and diverse filmmakers.
That's awesome.
Yeah, some money towards that. So,
David Haas is so, I love David.
I wanted to shout that out.
Fantastic.
Okay.
All right. Oh, America Reframed. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about America Reframed? I apologize. It's kind of important, I think, to
Sure,
discuss.
no, I will. So that is our other series. We're currently in our 4th season, and we co-curate with the World Channel. And it's all American stories. And it's a rolling open call. So again, if anyone wants to talk about it, I would, please come talk to me about that.
Did the
Specific America Reframed questions, I'll try and answer.
No, I get the sense, and I could be wrong, and perhaps because I did some consulting work with World Channel, as you know, that America Reframed seems to sort of, maybe not specifically, but it seems to focus on more stories from communities of color and not to say that POV doesn't, but because it does, but it seems like that's much more of the sort of the programming choice, central to its mission. Okay,
As
so
well.
okay,
Yes.
all right. Thank you.
Thank you.